All right, guys, NFL Week 6 is here. I'm going to give you guys all the players at each position that have a tough matchup this weekend. This is really going to help you guys with your starts and sits. And a lot of people need help with their starts and sits. These are the players at each position that have it in tough. So if you got to make an educated decision, you're deciding between this player and this player, these guys got it in tough. Now go back to yesterday's video, go back, scroll back, watch the last YouTube video I did. I did all the must starts based on optimal matchups, okay? And my opinions as well. I dive into that as well, and I give you guys whether they should start or sit predicated on their matchup. But today we're focusing on the guys that you must consider sitting possibly, all right? So very important. There's a disclaimer there, obviously, because if they're good players with tough matchup, hey, you got to make a decision. You got to start your starters for the most part. So I'm going to get into every player you must sit at each position. Now, today we got a game. We got Washington versus Chicago. The game isn't that exciting. I get it, but it's football. And we got to appreciate that when football is here, even though it's not the best teams going at it, it's still football. Because in the offseason, we're craving any football we can get. And speaking of craving, and something to make today and tonight more exciting, use the code FFC20. Go to Hooters.com or download the app right now and order some food for the game. So you guys got a head start right now. So you guys write the code down, Hooters.com. Download the app, use code FFC20 to save $10 on an order of 30 or more on takeout or delivery at select locations in the U.S. Okay, guys? So right now, go there, try the nachos, try the wings, try the amazing food. Order in tonight during the game, guys. You'll thank me for it. And let me know, guys. Let me know how the food is tonight. DM me, say I'm having Hooters. Send me a screenshot. Love to get that feedback and see how you guys are enjoying the food. But Hooters.com, download the app. The code you want to use, FFC20. To save, go order some food right now, or for tonight's game anyway, all right? And for the weekend, of course. All right, so let's talk about it, guys. The guys that have it in tough at each position. Let's dive into it here. Starting off with the quarterback position, going to rip through this. Mariota, Pat Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Jameis Winston, Jalen Hurts, Zach Wilson, Matt Ryan, Lamar Jackson. But you're asking me, Joe, I got Justin Herbert. He's got a tough matchup versus Denver secondary. I got Pat Mahomes. He's got a tough matchup versus Buffalo, arguably the best defense in the NFL. Do I start Pat Mahomes? Do I start Justin Herbert? Pat Mahomes coming off 2 consecutively good weeks, 24 points 2 weeks ago, 31 last week. Justin Herbert coming off a mediocre week last week, 14 points, 24 the week before. Do you start them? And the answer is, what is your other option, right? Do you have another quarterback? Like I went through the optimal plays yesterday, right? Do you have Josh Allen, right? Probably not. Do you have Geno Smith? Geno Smith as a backup, okay? If you do, he's got a better matchup versus Arizona. But who do you start? And that's a decision ultimately you have to make. But I'm just letting you guys know that Mahomes, Herbert, Hurts, Matt Ryan even, who had a mediocre 8-point week last week, Lamar Jackson, all these guys have a tough matchup versus position. Big names, all right? So it's up to you guys to make an executive decision. Jalen Hurts, 6th hardest matchup versus position versus Dallas, right? Divisional game. It's going to be tight. Coming off 5, straight wins. Is that going to continue? Something to monitor, right? Also, Kenny Pickett, a lot of people asking about him. He's got a tough matchup. 11th hardest versus position versus Tampa Bay. Something to be aware of for a lot of people who are thinking of starting Kenny Pickett. I've got him in a 2-quarterback league. I'm debating. All right, something to think about. But ultimately, I start my starters. There's not a week where I sit Justin Herbert, just to give you guys some insight. Hopefully that helps with your decision in regards to starts and sits. All right, moving on to the running back position here. I'm going to rip through the running backs here. Guys that have it in tough at the running back position. Now, this is something you need to be aware of. Tyler Algier, who has pretty much gotten the start since the Patterson injury, does have it in tough versus San Fran's rush defense. Be aware. Christian McCaffrey coming off 2 hot weeks. He's red hot. 2nd hardest matchup versus the Rams rush defense. Najee Harris, who's been ice cold, played Buffalo last week, had 7 points. New quarterback coming in, playing Tampa Bay's rush defense, got in tough. A lot of people ask me what to do with Najee. At the end of the day, it's hard to sell low. I would wait for a good game. He still is the workhorse running back. And I think last week was kind of the worst case scenario. Pickett, new quarterback coming in as his first start, playing the toughest defense in the NFL. I would probably keep one more week and sell high. Do I start him this week? If you have a better option, go ahead and do that. Start a better option. But Najee, 3rd hardest matchup versus position. Just be aware of that, okay? Alvin Kamara, coming off a huge week last week, does have it in tougher versus Cincy this week. be aware. Miles Sanders coming off an 8-point week last week playing Dallas. Tougher rush defense, got it in tough. Nick Chubb, who's been red hot, 6th hardest matchup versus position versus New England. Be aware of this stuff. Just be aware. You don't sit Nick Chubb the way he's been playing, but be aware if he does have a bad week, understand it was a tough matchup, 6th hardest versus position. Be aware. Austin Eckler, who's been red hot Austin Eckler, tougher matchup, 8th hardest versus position. He finally gets a good matchup this week, or a tough one. We're going to see how he holds up against that offense, or that defense, Denver. Then we got Saquon, right? Saquon Barkley versus Baltimore's rush defense, 10th hardest versus position. So again, some big names here. Saquon, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey. Do you sit them? Absolutely not. You do not sit them year long. Now, if you're playing DFS, you may want to consider some value plays, like I gave you guys the optimal starts at the position yesterday. You may want to start somebody who's got more upside and is cheaper, like a Brian Robinson, right? Way cheaper, great matchup versus Chicago. Maybe he breaks up. Maybe he has a big game, right? Maybe you go with those optimal plays. David Montgomery, good matchup versus position versus Washington. Maybe you want to do that in DFS. But in year long, you definitely do not want to sit your starters, all right? Now, Najee, questionable. If you have a better option, you probably want to consider him. Now, taking a look at the wide receiver position, very volatile position, a lot of ups and downs. The Chargers wide receivers this week versus Denver, tough matchup versus position. Christian Kirk coming off a crazy match, 2-point week last week, been inconsistent the past 2 weeks. Indy secondary, tough. 2nd hardest theoretically on paper here, matchup-wise, Christian Kirk. But he is a prime target, though. He is a prime target. Coming off a loss last week, the Jacksonville Jaguars could want a win this week versus Indy divisional game. Kirk might get lit up this week. Might light it up, I should say, this week. Not lit up, right? Other guys, Devin Duvernay, had a 13-point week last week. Baltimore versus the Giants this week. Tougher matchup versus that defense. Juju, 6 points. Marquise Valdes-Scantling, 15 points. Chiefs versus Buffalo. They've got it in tough this week. Olave, Michael Thomas, he's been banged up, but Olave, all these guys have been banged up. Make sure you check the starts, see if they're playing. But Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, tough matchup versus position versus Cincy. Be aware of that. DK Metcalf been red hot, tough matchup versus position. Him and Lockett got it in tough this week versus Arizona. Be cautious there, but you can't sit those guys. You can't sit those wide receiver ones. It's very hard to do, but just be aware, tough matchup. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, they've got it in tough this week versus San Fran. Drake London, been ice cold the past couple weeks. 8 points last week, 4 the week before. Got to step it up. Primary target. Mariota's got to start throwing the ball to him, but they've got it in tough. The Jets wide receivers. Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore versus Green Bay. Tougher matchup. Terry McLaurin versus Chicago. Believe it or not, 10th hardest matchup versus position on paper, but still could thrive. You never know, right? It's Chicago. Again, Alec Pierce, a lot of people excited about him. Picked him up off waiver wire. A guy I told you to stash in all leagues. Alec Pierce on all my teams has a mid-range matchup, actually around 12th hardest versus position. Him and Pittman versus Jacksonville. Going to be an interesting matchup to see how he holds up. A lot of people asking me about George Pickens. Mid-range matchup for him. 14 points last week. Him and Deontay. It's going to be interesting. Deontay was a little banged up. Should be good to go, though. Make sure you check the injury report. But George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Kenny Pickett versus Tampa Bay, mid-range matchup. I know a lot of people are excited about George Pickens. The Pickett to Pickens connection. Going to be interesting to see how that holds up. But they got mid-range matchups there. If you don't have a better option, Pickens could be a viable start. Who was leading in yards and receptions, but not so much in targets. Something to be aware of moving forward this week. Tight ends here, guys that have it in tough. I told you, Kyle Pitts, 2nd hardest versus position. Tight ends from Carolina versus the Rams, whether you're starting Ian Thomas, I wouldn't have, all those tight ends just not getting it done in Carolina, but they've got it in tough. Again, Kyle Pitts, like I said, got it in tough. Dallas Goedert, he's been consistent, very consistent. You don't want to sit him, even though he's got the 3rd hardest matchup versus position. Travis Kelce, 4th hardest matchup versus position. Do you sit him? Absolutely not. But he's got it in a little tougher versus Buffalo. It's going to be interesting to see how he holds up. And I don't get why these defenses don't cover one player. I mean, what do you have, 3 or 4 touchdowns last year? It's just one player. Cover him, for God's sakes. It's not that hard. It just blows my mind, man. They throw to him once, okay. Throw to him twice, okay. Let's be aware that, they just keep throwing at Kelce. Guard the guy. free up a safety to play back a little bit and make sure you stop him. They couldn't stop him last week. It was unbelievable. But he's got it in a little tough this week. Hayden Hurst, a lot of people asking about him. This is an interesting one. Been consistent the past 2 weeks. 12 points and 17 points, the past couple weeks. 17 points last week. Hayden Hurst playing Indy, 5th hardest matchup versus position. If you don't have a better option, go with him. Tight ends are hard to come by. You want to get at least 10 points out of your tight end. Hayden Hurst does have it in a little bit tougher, okay? Tyler Conklin coming off a terrible week last week. Has been consistent before. 7th hardest matchup versus position. Mo Alie-Cox coming off that 1 or 2 touchdown game a couple weeks ago, 27 points. Now he comes in with 2 points last week, and he's got a tough matchup. Mo Alie-Cox very predicated on his success is predicated on touchdowns. Very hard to trust, but has a tougher matchup. Cole Kmet has done really nothing, man. Cole Kmet has done nothing. 9th hardest matchup versus position. Been very boring, safe. He's got like a 5 to 9 point floor. Been very, very boring. Cole Kmet, all right? Dalton Schultz, a lot of people asking about him. He's been banged up. If he gets back in the lineup, 11th hardest matchup versus position. Cameron Brate's done nothing. Cade Audens had 10 points last week. All those tight ends versus Pittsburgh, Tampa versus Pittsburgh, 12th hardest versus position, be aware. Mark Andrews, mid-range matchup, you got to start him. And Tyler Higbee being consistent, mid-range matchup, got to start him. So again, you got some guys that have tough matchups. You're Hayden Hurst, that's questionable. If you have a better option, go with that. Dallas Goedert, you got to start him. Kyle Pitts, if you got a better option, start him over Kyle Pitts. Again, tough matchup versus San Fran. And obviously, you're not going to sit Travis Kelce, who's got the 4th hardest matchup versus position. Those are your tight ends, all right? Now, again, I gave you guys the optimal defense to start. You don't really need defenses that have tough matchups. It's not really something to be aware of. But if you are playing year-long, Patriots and Bills, solid defenses, but they have it a little bit tougher this week versus Cleveland and KC. They're playing defenses that can put up some points. Going to be interesting to see how they fare up in year-long. But I gave you guys all the optimal matchups yesterday in the optimal plays, all right? So, must you sit these guys because they have a tough matchup? No. But be aware, if you have better options, go with those. And at the end of the day, if you're torn between 2 players, look at how consistent they've been the past couple weeks, right? And go with your gut at the end of the field. After you've exhausted all options, looked at the depth chart, looked at the snap count, look at the targets, looked at everything, and you're torn, a gut feeling on your roster will make all the difference in the world. All right, guys? If you're new to the channel, subscribe. Head on over to Hooters. Remember, get the wings. FFC20 is the code you want to use. Save yourself $10 on order of 30 or more and take out a delivery. Go do that right now. We'll talk soon, guys. Thumbs up. Drop some starts and sits questions below. We'll talk soon. I'm out.